This is the first part of the narrated PowerPoint for Chapter 4, which talks about attitudes, emotions, and ethics. So the first thing we're going to talk about is what actually comprises an attitude. And so what you see on this slide is a model of an attitude. Starting with first the definition. As it says here, it's a hypothetical construct. In other words, it's not something that you can see. It's not tangible. We infer people's attitudes from their behaviors. This hypothetical construct consists of three things: beliefs, feelings, and behavioral predispositions. The first is what we call the cognitive component. This is the thinking part. So it's the opinion or the belief segment of an attitude. A person would say, I believe X, or I think X. Again, cognition is all about thinking. Followed by the affective component. Go ahead and say that out loud. It's not effective, it's affective. When we talk about affect, we're talking about feelings and emotions. And the third piece is the behavioral component. So this is your intention. So there's a cognitive component, an affective component, and a behavioral intention. I intend to do something. You can put these all together as follows. For example, I believe my boss is unfair. This is the cognitive part of an attitude. Followed by the feeling, I really hate it there. This is the affective part of the attitude. And so then we get to the behavioral intention. So I'm going to leave. Okay? So those three things fit together. Those three things together form the attitude. Now, one of the things that I've posted on our D2L site is a little video clip that I want you to watch. And I've titled it, What's Her Attitude? And I want you to pick out the cognitive part, the affective part, and the behavioral intention. What is it that she believes? What is it that she feels? And what is it that she's planning to do? And then be ready to talk about this on class. So what actually causes us to have the attitudes that we do? Well, there's two different pieces. One of which, very straightforward, your own direct experience. And then secondly, the learning that you can do by observing others. Now, this should look really familiar to you when we talk about learning by observing others. In order to learn, what do we have to do? Number one, we've got to be focused. That's the attention piece, right? Number two, we've got to be able to remember whatever it was that we observed. So we create this verbal code in our minds for what we observed. And then we create this mental image of ourselves acting just like the model. So it's practicing in your head before you actually do what that person is doing. Third, you go ahead and practice. So again, remember what I said. For anything, in order to really learn it, you have to do it. From self-efficacy, the phrase we use is inactive mastery. So you have to be able to do it. And then finally, you've got to be motivated, okay? That's how you actually can learn from observing another person. Now I want to talk to you about a really important theory, cognitive dissonance theory. This is one of the most important theories. It ranks right up there with reinforcement theory. Cognitive dissonance theory was first written about in 1957 by a guy whose last name is Festinger. And he talked about dissonance as a state of tension that is produced when a person, an individual, experiences conflict between their attitudes and their actual behavior. Now, pay careful attention. Remember, attitudes are about your cognitions, what you think, your affect, what you feel, and your behavioral intention, how you intend to behave. So there's those three pieces, and then the actual behavior. And what he says, and this is critical, is that dissonance is inherently aversive. And remember, I've used that word before, and basically it means something that we want to avoid. Nobody likes to experience the conflict between what they think, what they feel, what they plan to do, and then what they actually do. We can't stand it. So let me try to elaborate on this just a little bit more. What people try to do is they try to keep everything consistent. You and I are simply happiest when everything is in alignment, when there's consistency between how we feel, how we think, and what we plan to do. We also like consistency between all of those things. Remember, those are the things that comprise the attitude, and then what we actually do. So I think that a particular behavior is really not a good idea. It makes me feel bad when I find myself doing it. And so I plan to not do it anymore. And then I go ahead and do it. And now I'm pretty unhappy with myself. I may be feeling a sense of regret. So no matter what example you use, wherever there's consistency between and among all those parts, that makes us happy. And when there's inconsistency, when there's a mismatch, when these things don't align, now we're unhappy. Or the word we use from psychology is we experience cognitive dissonance. So consistency is cognitive consonance. All is well with the world. We are in harmony. Inconsistency is cognitive dissonance. And I want to encourage you to say those words out loud because it'll be so much easier for you to remember them. It's disequilibrium. It's we don't feel balanced. We don't feel in harmony. So here are a few propositions, really important, really important. First, it says the more important or the greater the degree of the violated expectation, the greater the amount of dissonance. So you and I have expectations of ourselves, of the people we work with, of our bosses, of our family, of our we have all kinds of expectations. And when those expectations aren't met, when what we expect to see happen doesn't actually happen, when there's cognitive dissonance, the greater the degree of the violated expectation, the greater the amount of dissonance. Now remember what I said earlier. Dissonance is something that is inherently aversive. We can't stand it. And so the second proposition comes into play. The more dissonance that you and I feel, the stronger we feel that we need to get rid of that dissonance. We can't stand dissonance. We are going to do something to reduce it, to eliminate it. Otherwise, it's like the pea under the mattress, to use that old fable. It's that thing that's just causing our skin to crawl. It's the thing that we can't let go of, the thing we keep thinking about because something is not right in our world. We expected to get a pay raise. We didn't get it. We really expected it. It was a really big deal to us. We didn't get it. Now we really need to do something about that. We're not just going to sit and take it. We expected that we would be praised for a particular project that we finished. And instead, we were punished because we were told that what we did was not only not okay, it was incredibly unacceptable. It was garbage. Wow, this is totally not what we were expecting. We're going to have to do something to somehow deal with all that dissonance. And because the expectation we had was so high and then it wasn't met in any, wow, we are just going to be going crazy trying to deal with this. So what are our options? We've really got 4, and I want you to look at this nice little figure here and see the 2 by 2. You've got a continuum that runs from destructive to constructive. So from the negative to the positive. That's the horizontal. Then you have the vertical, which is active down to passive. So active, you're doing something. Passive, you're not. Now you have 4 choices when it comes to how you're going to deal with your You choose. You choose. So you start up in the upper right hand quadrant, and this is what we call voice. This is both active and constructive. So you're going to do something positive to try and deal with your dissonance. You were told Yeah, you're not getting the promotion that you thought you were going to get. So now what are you going to do? Well, you're going to use voice and you decide, I will go and talk to my boss, and I will talk to my boss about things that I can do between now and the next evaluation period to help me be better positioned for a promotion. That's a great example of voice. You're being constructive to try and deal with your dissonance. In the lower right hand corner, we're still constructive, so it's still positive, but this is more passive. And you basically say to yourself, you know what, it's okay, it just wasn't my turn. You feel very loyal. It just wasn't my term for a promotion. I'm just going to wait it out, and I'm sure that things will get better. I'm sure that the next time I'll be the person who gets that promotion. Over in the lower left-hand quadrant, this is neglect. And notice what's happening here. We've got a destructive response, so it's negative. It's not good. But it's passive. It's not active. Basically, this is where you assume, you know what, this is never going to get any better. I'm not going to do anything to make things worse. I'm not going to try and get myself fired, for example. But I'm not really going to try and work any harder. Things are probably just going to get worse. I'm not really going to do anything. So you just sort of neglect the situation. The upper left hand is the most willfully negative response that you can have to dissonance. And we call this exit, even though it doesn't always mean that you're actually leaving the organization. It can mean a number of things. For example, it can mean that you decide to withdraw. You start to come in late to work. You skip work. Maybe you strike out in some fashion. You sabotage your coworkers or your boss. Or, again, you just decide to leave. I've had it. I can't, you know what? I should have been promoted. I wasn't promoted. I don't need to stay here. I'm going to look for another job. So how can we help people, the people who work for us, how can we help them to reduce or eliminate dissonance? Well, first of all, as a manager, we need to find out what exactly are their expectations. It is incumbent upon us as managers to find out what our employees expect and then try not to violate those expectations. In general, we need to be consistent. When we're arbitrary, when we're capricious, when we make decisions that just don't make sense to people, when they don't seem fair, when they don't seem equitable, that creates a lot of dissonance for people. This leads right into the second point. We have to treat people equitably. Now, when I talk about motivation in class, I'm going to explain this in much more detail, but let me be clear about one thing. Equitable is not the same as equal. Equal is you give everybody the exact same pay raise, for example. Equitable is you pay people according to how well they perform. The folks who do a better job, they get paid better. The folks who don't do as good of a job, they get paid less. That's called equity. Once you establish policies, you've got to stick to them. Otherwise, you just make life really confusing for people, and they don't know, well, what am I supposed to be doing here? And so what you're going to be doing is creating a lot of dissonance for them. Try not to do that. Finally, make sure that you tie rewards to performance, and this relates a lot to that second point where you're treating people equitably. When people perform at a high level, they deserve rewards at a high level. When they perform at a lower level, their rewards should be lower, and so on. Pretty straightforward stuff. Now, on this slide it says application, and here's what I want you to do. On page 8 of your lecture outline, you have an application. It talks about Pat Rouse, who's a traffic manager for ABC Corp. Now, you're going to read through this application. We're not going to do it while I'm on the slides here, but you're going to read through this application, and then what I want you to do for class on Tuesday is I want you to write in the space that's provided on page 8 of your lecture outline an explanation for Pat's behavior. Now let me switch gears real quick. We're going to talk a little bit about job satisfaction. This is going to go pretty quick. So what is it? It's a pleasurable or a positive emotional state that results from the appraisal of one's job or job experience. You can be satisfied with your pay, with the work, with promotion opportunities, supervision, coworkers, etc. So what are the causes? What are the antecedents? That's what That's what antecedents means. It means cause. Well, sometimes it's the work itself. And we'll talk more about this when we talk about job characteristics under motivation. That's a whole nother chapter. But the work itself can be incredibly satisfying. When we've got good supervision, a supervisor that we can respect, that can be satisfying. When we have great relationships with our coworkers, that can be satisfying. When the rewards that accrue to us are valued, that can be very satisfying. Generally, pay doesn't have a very strong relationship to satisfaction, for reasons that I'll explain more again when we talk about motivation in a later chapter. Finally, sometimes it's our personality that really makes a difference. Some people, no matter how good the work is, no matter how great their boss, no matter how wonderful their coworkers, doesn't matter. They're just kind of a negative Nelly. They're the Eeyore from the Winnie the Pooh series. They're the person who is just never happy. There's no way for them to achieve a high level of satisfaction. So what are some of the effects? What happens as a result when people are satisfied? Number one, we can talk about performance, and I mentioned this earlier in the semester. You know, there's this tacit theory that people have, this unspoken belief that happy or satisfied people are just more productive. You know, if we could just make our people happy, they would work harder. That's just bogus, folks. The relationship between job satisfaction and performance is way more complex. There are, for example, many more antecedents or causes to performance than satisfaction. Number one, ability. Number two, motivation. Number three, opportunity. Those are much more powerful antecedents to performance. Likewise, there are many more antecedents to satisfaction than performance. That's just one piece of the puzzle. Lots of other things contribute to whether you and I are satisfied. Thing that relates to both and so likely moderates the relationship between satisfaction and performance is rewards. So we know that valued rewards tend to lead to higher satisfaction, and we know that valued rewards that depend on performance, that are contingent on performance, on whether or not you or I actually achieves the desired level of performance, then that tends to create better performance and higher satisfaction. So rewards really make a difference. I want you to write down the phrase expectancy theory, because again, when we talk about motivation, I'm going to talk about expectancy theory, and that's really going to put together this notion of performance and rewards and how, you know what, maybe that contributes to our effort and our satisfaction. There's also an interesting thing with customer satisfaction. So when you've got satisfied employees, you also tend to have satisfied customers, and here's why. Those employees will tend to be more friendly, more upbeat, more responsive. They're happy to help people. They're excited to help people, and so that makes the customers happy. Those happy employees are less likely to turn over. So they're there. They build those long-term customer relationships. For example, at my bank, when I walk into the bank, there's a person who's been there for as long as I've been banking there. It's wonderful. I come in through the doors. I'm 15, 20 feet away from this. The person looks up and she calls out to me by name. She knows who I am. Lucy, how are you? That's a long-term relationship. Those satisfied employees also, because they haven't turned over, because they've been there a long time, they've got experience. So they can actually answer questions well. That makes customers really happy. Now the flip side to all of this is that when you've got unhappy customers, guess what? That can make your employees pretty darn unhappy. Imagine working in a call center, for example, where all you listen to all day long, unhappy customers. Boy, that can really bring you down. Or every encounter that you have with people they're customers who are just really negative. Wow, it's tough when you're an employee to really be happy under those conditions. Job satisfaction, you shouldn't be surprised, is correlated positively with organizational citizenship behavior. What that means is that when people are happy, they are more willing to go above and beyond, and I'm not talking about performance here, ladies and gentlemen. I'm talking about they will do the things that aren't even part of their job description, and they will do so happily. When people are unhappy, that That's when they're more likely to engage in workplace deviance behavior, to do the kinds of things we don't want them to be doing. Those dissatisfied workers, they skip work. They're likely to quit. They're likely to report more psychological and medical problems. It's all for real, which all leads to workplace deviance or contributes to workplace deviance. So they're going to do things like stealing, things you just don't want them to do. Now, the last topic I'm going to talk about in this part, in part 1 for this chapter, is organizational commitment. And here we're talking about the strength of a person's identification with an organization. So, do you identify with your organization's goals? Do you want to stay in that organization? That's what we're talking about when we talk about organizational commitment. 3 kinds of commitment that I want to talk about very quickly. They're critical for you to understand. Number 1, affective commitment. Remember that word and how it's pronounced. It's not affective, it's not effective, it's affective. And so you know what this means. Affect is emotion, feelings. So this is when a person has an emotional attachment to the organization, a belief in its values. The second is continuance commitments. This is when a person stays with an organization because, frankly, they think it will cost them more if they leave it than if they stay. This is the kind of person who's getting close to retiring, who decides to stick around because it's the only way to make sure that they'll get their entire pension, for example. Or they stay with the organization, they're committed to the organization because of its insurance plan. The third is normative, and this is all about, I stay with the organization because I'm loyal, because I think I have an ethical obligation to stay with the organization. They've treated me well over the years, and I want to repay that positive treatment. Now, of these 3, the most important is affective commitment. When you engage a person's emotions, then they are not only more likely to stay with your organization, but to perform at a very high level. This is the kind of person who's likely to engage in organizational citizenship behavior. This is the kind of person who is an ambassador for your organization, who will encourage other people to commit to your organization. The value of affective commitment for the organization is extraordinary. It allows you to get people who are emotionally engaged, who will, go to the mountain, if you will, for the organization. They will make sacrifices for the organization because, here's the emotion word, they love the organization. They love their coworkers. They stay because these are the people that I'm committed to. These are the people that I love in the platonic sense. This is the most powerful form of commitment, and it's the one as managers that we want to do our best to try and encourage.